To introduce our panelists, we have Rita Brown from Hyde Park One. Rita is an award-winning former journalist. She now works as a global press officer, and she has 2 years of experience in her single parenthood journey and is passionate about turning the shame of that label into a strength, particularly for her boys, in helping them to know that their family is exactly how it should look for them and their experiences. We have Carol McCormack from White's Chapel Ward. Carol is our stake primary president. Carol has gone through many experiences, some of them being homelessness and also unemployment, and navigated raising her daughter as a single parent. And she has joined the church at the age of 15, and that has been a strength for her. And she's been able to exercise so much faith through her faith, and also has a love for knitting as well, and loves knitting clothes for children. We also have Anne-Marie Falwell from Hyde Park 2 Ward. Anne-Marie has been a single member of the church since 1989, has 4 children, and initially found the church in Jamaica, I believe. And since returning to the UK, she again met the missionaries and hasn't looked back. Emery works in bereavement and looks after those who have lost loved ones. So that's a little bit about our panelists this evening, and I'm sure they'll be able to share a little bit more about their story as we have a conversation with them. But at the moment, I'm going to hand the time over to Rita to be able to navigate that conversation. So thank you, Rita.
Perfect. Thank you, Kenya. And thank you, Carol and Anne-Marie, for joining us today. And first, Anne-Marie, I want to come to yourself because I know we got a very quick overview of your bio, but I thought it would be helpful if we shared, and if you shared in your own words, what it was like to be a single parent and kind of that first initial experience of it.
Well, thank you. I joined as I said, I joined the church in 1989, but I wasn't aware of any stigma being a single mum, maybe because I just didn't know about the church, and I don't know if the stigma is real or imagined. So I never ever had worry or possible shame or anything like that. So, you know, I was just, I was on my own and I had kids. That's that. So I didn't have that experience.
I love that.
I asked my son about it because I spoke to my son and asked him how he felt about that, and he said exactly the same thing. It was never an issue for them.
I love that. My experience is different to that, but I absolutely love how powerful your experience feels from that, and I hope that turns out to be everybody's experience. Carol, how about yourself in terms of kind of your journey into single parenthood and what that was like?
I joined the church when I was 15. I got married when I was 30, had Alana, and then 18 months after she was born, our marriage fell apart. So I made the decision to leave and come back up to London. I moved back into Hyde Park, where I'd been since 1974. This is now in 1991. And again, I never felt, I felt I'd failed, but people around me didn't make me feel that way. That was my own thought and feeling. And I think the thing that hit me the most was that I wouldn't have the priesthood in my home anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, brother. But it was a good decision, because if I'd stayed in the marriage, I wouldn't be active. My daughter wouldn't be active. We wouldn't have the gospel. And there's always priesthood around. And obviously over the last 10 years or so, there's been a change on how we perceive the priesthood. Mm-hmm. And that has helped a lot. But we've never not had access to the priesthood, even though we don't have a priest holder in our home. And I'm grateful for the people in the Hyde Park ward, when it was one ward, for the support and love they gave. I never felt different from anybody else. My daughter did. Because it's all family, and you know, Father's Day was quite painful for her, but she's come through it. She gave an amazing talk on Father's Day, she was asked to give a talk on Father's Day, and she said to the bishop, "You know it's Father's Day, don't you?" And he said, "Oh, sorry." She said, "No, no, I'll do it." And her young women's president, she's 31 now, but her young women's president and her boys who were in the youth with Alon still remember that talk. So she based it on Heavenly Father rather than earthly fathers, and it made me cry. But
Yeah,
I was very proud of her that she'd overcome that struggle, because it is hard when you see other people with dads and you don't have yours around. She hadn't seen her dad. Well, she's just met up with him this year, but she hadn't seen him since she was 5. So
you should be proud. And there's a few things that you touched on there that I would love to come back to. One was priesthood. One was also never being without it, which I think follows on to the miracles, perhaps, and the blessings that we've all been in receipt of. And we're going to come back to those. But if you don't mind, I thought it would be worth just sharing very quickly my experience, because I was inactive when I became a single parent. I was raised in the church in California, and I wonder if the difference between our feelings around the stigma was perhaps the culture of the church in the US versus here in the UK. And I was inactive and in so much pain that I was married for 13 years, and all of a sudden, literally overnight, single parent to 3 kids. We were due to move to London, and weeks before my husband left. And I was in so much pain that the only place I could think in that moment to go to just put me out of my misery was the church, which actually was across the street from my house that I literally passed every day for like 10 years and never stepped inside. And it was a Tuesday at like 1 p.m., so nobody should be there. And I showed up, and there was one car in the parking lot, and it was the bishop, um, by complete happenstance. And he gave me a blessing. I remembered my dad doing that when I was little. And again, my husband wasn't a member. So here there was this priesthood showing up in my life when I needed it. And I remember the blessings from my dad being very much like, "You're going to do great on school exams." So they were all like lovely and made me feel great. And this blessing was, "This is going to be really hard and I can't take away the pain. But if you show up every Sunday, I promise you'll get through it." And so that's how I came back to church. And it was the priesthood showing up. It was, even though I felt so judged and shameful in my own life, when I stepped into church that day, I didn't feel any judging. And when I showed up every Sunday, sometimes in jeans, because I was just like all over the place trying to manage my life, I was welcomed. And I think that's so important for single parents to feel like they belong. But I want to go back, if it's okay, to what you said about the priesthood, because that was a really important moment in my life where the priesthood showed up for me, and it wasn't from within my home. Anne Marie, do you have any examples of the priesthood showing up in your life?
Well, as I understood the priesthood, I felt I had to understand it, because as much as I could back then, we had 3 sons. And I never felt, for me, I never ever felt that priesthood was in my home, because I believed in Jesus Christ, and he was the one person I could go to at any time. I did have, obviously, over the years, have people come in to give my children or myself a blessing if they were ill or something like that. And I just, again, I never felt it. I think I used the expression once, I was in La La Land, because I just wasn't aware of the church culture. And maybe La La Land's probably the best place to be at times.
And what was it like raising 3 sons who would then, have the priesthood and, to have that female influence in the home, which is so powerful?
I mean, eventually, only one of my children is active. I felt very much like Carol when the divorce happened. You did feel that sense of failure. I mean, because I wasn't married to anyone in the church, because I obviously came into the church after the marriage had broken up. I found the church, and I did feel that sense of failure, but I didn't have any of these stigmas. It was just a case of you had to get on with it. You had these children that you had to get up every morning for, and that was what you focused on.
And I just want
And
to remind, sorry, Anne Marie, I just want to remind people to put any questions in on the chat so that we can get to them. And Anne Marie, you talked about like that was just life. You had to get up in the morning because there was kids to feed and get to school. And there was so much on your plate. How did people, I think, it's probably really important for people to understand perhaps how they can show up for the single parents in their wards. How did people show up for you that was memorable to you, that was kind of a blessing, and that you weren't expecting?
Well, I must admit, I mean, honestly, I just had kindness all around, to be honest with you. I don't remember having unkindness. I wasn't, I grew up in a family that believed but never went to church. So when I joined the church, it wasn't easy for me to get into this getting to church all the time. So I didn't. And I had the patriarch and his wife that was in North London at the time, back in 1989. And they used to show up at my home regularly. And to my shame, there were times when I just thought, oh gosh, but I would invite them in, and he used to, Dougal McEwen used to encourage me to, oh, if you, come to church once a month, just come along. And I'd sit there and think, oh, I can do that. And that's what sort of led. My conversion was 4 years,
Yeah.
so I feel like I was still learning along with my children.
Yeah.
I didn't know them.
But I love how when you recalled that story, you had his name because it was so memorable to you. Carol, I just want to come back to you in terms of the blessings that you saw show up in your life as you faced hardship and that incredible juggle of trying to provide and parent.
I was extra blessed because I worked for, I don't know if anybody knows, it's from the same ward as Patriarch McEwen, actually. So London North have a lot to be proud of. Vance Levitt and Marquita Levitt. I worked for them, and he was a bishop. He was my state president while I was working for him. And he was the first person I contacted when I knew my marriage was failing, and I got my job back with him. And they became what I called my church mum and dad. So I had him always. I knew I could phone him whenever I needed it, but my own ward members were always there. I mean, financially it was hard, and I remember one time I'd miscalculated really badly, and I'd put Alana to bed. It was a Saturday night, and I was just sitting on the couch crying. I didn't know I didn't have enough to pay the rent on the Monday, and so I just said a prayer. Went to church Sunday, came home, and there was this red envelope on the floor. It was coming up to Christmas. There was this red envelope on the floor, and I picked it up, and it felt like a cross-stitch Christmas card that a friend of mine always made me. So I opened it up, and there in the envelope was cash, and it was my exact amount for my next month's rent. And it just said, the message in it said, just felt inspired to give you this, use it wisely. I don't know who it was from, but I told nobody except Heavenly Father.
That is a huge answer to a prayer.
Yeah, big time. But it's been like that. I've had small things, big things like that all through my life, and I am so grateful. And I can't ever repay these people. I just try and be nice to others, I guess. I don't know what else you can do, but yeah, he's always watched over me. Always.
Yeah, you're right. There is a ripple effect. And my kids are still quite little. So during the pandemic, when they were all homeschooling and I was trying to work, it got a little bit insane. And I remembered a similar instance where it was a Sunday and I actually was working all day for this huge announcement on Monday. I was on conference calls all day, and I kept promising my boys all week that I would make them spaghetti and meatballs. And all week I was basically microwaving stuff for them because I didn't have time. And somebody from my ward knocked on my door at 5 o'clock on the Sunday with a big tray of homemade spaghetti and meatballs. And I just was like, I have to tell you like what's happened. And I literally had my laptop in one hand with my work calls, and I had the boys. And she said, oh, I just thought I'd make this for you and take the boys out for a few hours. And I said, you have no idea. I've been promising them for 7 days. Emery, is there any sort of kind of inspired moments like that you feel compelled to share?
Yeah, something similar to Carol's. I remember that one particular year. I think it was soon after I joined the church. I mean, I joined the church in Wembley, and I sort of ended up. I was like Carol. I was in this homelessness. I was in temporary accommodation, so I ended up in Finchley. Then I ended up in Greenford. So I was in the Hayes ward, and then when I finally came to this ward, where I've been since '93, and I remember that year I made sure I paid my tithing regularly. And I remember it was Christmas Eve, and I was looking at the Christmas tree with the few presents underneath it, and I thought, gosh, it'd be really nice to see a load more presents. You just have a sort of thought back to when you were
Yeah.
younger and there were more presents under the tree. And then about an hour later, my bishop said, he phoned me and he said, "Are you at home?" I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, we're going to play Santa and the Elves." And I didn't have any clue what he was talking about. And when they arrived, the bishop and about 4 missionaries walked in, and they had presents and food and an envelope, like Carol said, with some money in it. I mean, the tree was just inundated with presents. And honestly, it was just such a beautiful moment. It happened, and had a few, like Carol said, a few times like that, where you didn't know quite what you were going to get next or where it was coming from, but it was a beautiful moment, and I'm really grateful for them, because it testified to my children, even if they haven't quite embraced that, but it's still a memory.
Yeah. And I think it is a great example to our kids about service. And Carol, you said, and I can relate to that, like I can't physically repay these people like for like what they've done for me, but I can be kind to them. And hopefully our children can do that too, because of them, the impact that it's had on them. But Carol, I think it's so amazing that you lead the primary, which is the next generation of kids. And I'm wondering, in your role during that, what is it that we can do to make children of single parents feel represented and included in the church?
Oh, I don't know. We've always, whenever I've been in primary and Father's Day has come around, we've always emphasized Heavenly Father. I mean, we've included earthly fathers, but we've always emphasized Heavenly Father, so that, and even if Dad doesn't live at home or you go see, that the Heavenly Father is always there. And I don't. I think it's not as big a. I say no, that's going to come out wrong, but I'm going to say it's not a biggest thing now as being a single parent. It's more, there's a lot more of us now. It's
Yeah.
not frowned on as much. So I think a lot of our children don't feel that, but there are some that do, especially boys.
Yeah.
Notice the boys feel it more when Dad's not around.
And
Um,
maybe even simple things, like there's so many things that we do in terms of visuals in the church, but maybe if we're having visual representations of families, it's making sure that single parent families are included
I
in those
put
visuals.
different pictures up, and you explain to them that families can be one person, they can be a mom and a child, they can be dad and so family no longer means mum, dad, and 2.5 children. It's whatever unit of you have, and so, and I do, and I put up different nationalities as well, because my niece, her father is from Ghana, sorry, and obviously my sister's from England, and she, growing up, was one of a minority in her school, and she really felt the difference in her skin color, and so that pointed that out to me. So I always put up different nationalities as well to cover that. But I do. I try. I don't know.
I think what you're doing is great. And just, I didn't have that in my primary growing up. And I love that my boys will have that leadership from the top down and my stake for them. And Marie, is there anything that you think that we can do as a church to better include single parents and also to better include the children of single parents?
Because again, I didn't really have that sort of, if you want to use the term, prejudice, as though, I wasn't treated any differently. But I think it's not just about single parents. I think we need to, as women, accept each other, in that, there's the older, I mean, I haven't talked about my calling. My calling is the stake single adult for the Hyde Park Stake. And I look after a group called 40 to Infinity. That's my group.
Love that.
I mean, the oldest person that we used to come to our meeting was about 84, and he had a lovely time. And I think there's this attitude sometimes, and I don't think it's deliberate, but young women might feel that the old person is old, or we need to just rubbish. That's rubbish. I mean, we've all got something to share. We've all got a story to tell. And women don't realize that they're actually good for each other, because they strengthen each other in ways that I had that experience. I never used to hang out with girls very much, and when I did, I found I grew personally and was strengthened in being a woman by hanging out with other women. Yeah, there are some downsides to it, but and that just depends on the woman and what people think and their perceptions. That's what we're really talking about. But yeah, that was my experience at the time. And what we can do, I think we just need to accept each other. There are going to be older people, there are going to be younger people. Let's just be welcoming.
I love what you say there in terms of recognizing the opportunity to learn from each other with each individual.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There's a massive opportunity to learn and then to gain and also become better versions of ourselves because we've opened up ourselves to others.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
And I just wonder if it's a good time now to ask you both, because then this is me very selfishly thinking from my perspective, but if how single parenthood has strengthened your testimony, if it has, if there's been your journey with it and how that has kind of influenced your testimony.
I think because as an adult, you're on your own with the responsibility. I've been fortunate in that I only had the one child. So my experience is probably a little less stressful than you guys. But I think just knowing that there is someone there you can talk to 24/7, regardless, because I know people say, call me anytime, but then you call and you can't get them. But Heavenly Father's always there. And that's something I've really come to appreciate and to not take for granted. He has always been there every time I've called. And I'm grateful for that knowledge. I am. And I didn't always feel that way before I had this experience. Because we have something so readily available, a lot of the time we do take it for granted, but
Yeah.
no, I do not take that for granted at all. I'm very mindful of his presence in my life. And that's something I've come to learn through this.
That is a gentle but equally powerful reminder of that, like you said, that open 24/7 communication that's available to us. And Emery, something that you said earlier, I'm not going to ask you the same question in terms of the influence it's had on your testimony, but you talked about your 4-year conversion. And if I look at my life, mine was like a 30-year conversion, because 30 plus, right? I was raised in the church. I was out of it for, 15 years, and then I came back. So I could really relate to that. But as has kind of, I guess I'm just interested in terms of how single parenthood has influenced your testimony, if it has, and if you're able to share that.
I wish I could articulate more what I was told, but I was talking once with the missionaries, and they explained to me that yes, I'm the single mother, but there are certain keys that are available to me as a single mother. And I didn't know that blessing was upon me. So it taught me that Heavenly Father does not leave us in this, oh, you're a single parent and you're on your own. And no, he gives us particular keys that are available to you as the only parent, whether it's the man on his own or the woman on his own. There are keys that are there for you. So that it's like everything's in order. There's nothing that he hasn't prepared you for. Do you know what I mean? Or prepared to help you if you end up in that situation. Because single parenthood isn't always about divorce. one of my best friends in the ward, you know, she lost her husband at the age of 33, and she had a special needs daughter and you know, a younger daughter. So I've seen, you know, that there's other ways of becoming single, you know.
Definitely. And like you said, there are keys available to you. And I personally, I have never felt more supported in my life than when I became a single parent. So that at the start, I felt incredibly alone, and I'm 3.5 years in now, February 2018. But I showed up every Sunday, like the bishop said, and I ended up having I had a custody case because we were in the middle of this move, and I ended up winning. There's no winners in that. I ended up being awarded custody and the right to move, and it was so exceptional that I could just only see like the power of the church in it, and the blessings that the bishop had said if I showed up, no matter how hard it was. And it was hard to wrangle 3 kids by myself
Yeah.
and to go somewhere I hadn't been for a very long time. So it completely strengthened my testimony. And it was also the first time in my life that I realized it was okay to show up how I am, however imperfect that was, that there was a place for me. And if I took the gospel back to its root, there was Christ who loved and welcomed and walked with everybody, not just the people that had all their life together. But I think it's also probably worth talking about that incredible balance. And Anne-Marie, you outnumber me with kids. How do you balance work and kids and trying to just keep everyone going in the direction they're meant to be going?
Well, I don't know if I did that successfully, actually. I mean, I'd certainly retrained while I was off with the children. So I went from normal secretary to legal secretary. And I mean, I just remember those days when you had to get up really early, you know, get the children ready, get them off to school, take the other one to nursery, and you came home, you know, you do the same thing. You go to the childminder at the end of the day, and that was it. That was just life.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I was the most organized, because like I said, I was still learning. I was just something else back then. And I mean, the one compliment I remember getting is every evening I would pick up my son Joseph from his childminder, and I'd go to a local shop just to get him some little sweets, little treats. And he would always go in there and he'd pick up the toys, and I'd say, Joseph, you know, put it back, you know. And I did this for weeks. And then one day I went to the counter to pay, and the man looked at me and said, "Gosh, you're such a good mother." And I went, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Do you know how many mothers come in here and their children do exactly what your child does, but they swear at them and they shout?" And he said, "All I was doing is put it back." It was just like, "Put it back, Joseph, just put it." I didn't even know I was doing it.
Oh my goodness, I love that. And Carol, what about you? How have you balanced?
I was, again, you see, he's watched over me. I was working for President Levitt, but it was up in North London, and we were in temporary accommodation after losing my flat in Bayswater after we split up. I had a lot of financial debt because of my marriage. I went into my marriage with owning a flat in Bayswater, having savings, a clear credit card, and I left just before my 3rd anniversary, and I no longer had the flat. That was way behind in arrears with the mortgage. My credit card was maxed out, and my overdraft was maxed out. So financially it was hard, but and I was working for President Levitt. I lost the flat and we were put into temporary accommodation, and then eventually we were told, I was told I'd only get a 1-bedroom flat, and we were told I actually got a 2-bedroom, which we're still in. Been here 27 years, but it was a nightmare getting up to North London every morning with a 3-year-old in tow. And so I changed jobs, and I found a job in the local school, which is a 5-minute walk away. I did the run up to North London and back for a year. And on the way home one time, I don't know why, I was shouting at my daughter, which I don't remember why, but I do remember shouting. And as we got in the lift to come up, she said, "You can't talk to me like that. I'm a child of God." And that stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, I've got to do something to change. And so I found another job just 5 minutes walk away. So again, I got off lightly, ladies. I'm really sorry. But
You did.
I
You're
did
right about
voluntary
that,
work.
Carol, because you tend to focus on the job that can help you with the children more than
Yeah.
anything else at this point.
Yeah.
Well, I did voluntary work there for a couple of months, and no, for a year, and then we changed head teachers. And as I was coming past the office, the kids had gone. I'd stayed late for some reason. Lani was in play center. Most of the kids had gone. They were in the hall, and I could hear him jabbering away in the hall, in the office. I stuck my head round the door and I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I've got to get this letter out. I can't type, and I'm in a hurry." So I said, "If it's not confidential, dictate it and I'll type it," which I did. And the next morning when I walked in, he said, "Do you want a full-time job in the office?" And that was it. I was there 22 years.
And
So
I just, do you think there was a bit of kind of like divine intervention there, that all lined up?
oh, always, always.
Yeah.
The Lord has never, ever, ever let me down, ever. There's always something that happens, even if I don't know it's happening right then. As I reflect back on it, it had to be. I don't know how else it could have happened.
Yeah, I can relate to that, 'cause prior to my marriage ending, I knew I wanted to leave journalism, and I was applying for these jobs. I thought what I had was a pretty incredible CV, and I literally would get to the interviews and then I'd get the rejection. And I that like there was a whole string of those. I got the job that I have now, and it wasn't until I became a single parent that I realized that the job I have now is literally the only one that allows me to pay my bills on my own. None of the other ones I could have survived on. But I didn't know that then. I didn't see what was coming around the corner. And so I have to believe that there was divine intervention in that.
Yes.
But sometimes it's hard to see, and the rejection and then the failure that, you don't know what's right around the corner.
No, he has always brought it brought it through for me. So
Um,
I'm just very fortunate and very blessed.
And I think it's worth mentioning, you talked about yelling at your daughter and you said I've got to change, but I think it says something about the type of parent you are, that your daughter knew that she was a child of God and was able to say that with such certainty. That is a great reflection of your parenting.
I think we had primary to thank for that mainly. I was in primary, but she was in nursery or Sunbeams. We're still in contact with her Sunbeam teacher from that time too.
Oh wow, that's
Amazing
amazing.
teacher. Yeah.
Um,
Again, you see, another blessing. Amazing teachers throughout to help.
yeah, those ripple effects go far wider
Yeah.
than sometimes we expect.
Yeah.
And Anne Marie, I wonder if it's just worth coming back to you quickly, because we've talked about the priesthood and it showing up in our lives, but also empowering ourselves with the keys that we have and exercising those. We've talked about the balance. We've talked about the great examples of people helping us. Um, and we've also talked about stigmas, whether they've existed for us personally or not. And I'm what I'd like to talk about now is kind of looking ahead in terms of the work that is left to do. Great work that we all can do, but what do you think the priority should be for us as members? What can we do to influence in our own circles of influence to continue to make the church an inclusive and a welcoming place?
I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything negative. I think. I mean, obviously, over the last, say, half a year, I've been on these calls and heard ladies, talk about their other experiences with divorce, etc. Like it's a hard one because sometimes people, this is men or women, people can say things to you, and when you're going through a hard time, and although they're trying to be comforting, They can say things that can really throw you or make you feel
Yeah.
worse sometimes. So
No, you're right. I sometimes hear that, and people don't mean it at all when they say, "Oh, isn't it great you get a break?" When my kids go to their dads.
yeah,
But for me, it's heartbreak, and the
yeah,
two things live inside of you: the joy that they get to go make those memories with that other parent, but it's
right,
not a break.
yeah,
It's emotionally
yeah,
very difficult.
It is.
yes.
It is.
I think it's just to be look. It just be kind, and if you feel that you're not sure what to say, just say, I'm really sorry this is happening to you. That might be the easiest thing to say, and
Yeah,
to listen to each other, and to um empathize or sympathize, or just be a friend, you know.
yeah, and perhaps be open to correction and
Mm,
not take that personally, and just take it as an opportunity to learn
mm,
and alter behavior going forward.
mm.
Carol, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I just think as we share our stories, um, it's hard to change somebody's perception of something. And some people will always have this, oh, you're a single. I think President Adoye touched on it in State Council one time. People have these uh, unconscious biases. As we're not even aware of them. You see a group of hooded teenagers and you immediately think they're bad, but they're not. And so I think the same is with single parents. A lot of people think single parents, oh, you can't be any good, or, similar things like that. And we just need to change somehow people's perception of that. I don't know how, just by example, I guess, and loving everybody for who they are and not their circumstances, not where they're from or anything. I mean, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yes,
I just I don't know how you change somebody's perception of something.
I think the only thing that changes perception is your life experience when you think about it.
That's
I
what
can
Yeah.
remember, if you remember,
just
Carol, after church every Sunday, remember all the children used to go into the cultural hall. They all used to just go straight to the cultural hall. And I
yes.
remember there was a young woman, and I'm talking about from Britannia, in there one day, and the children were just playing and running around and trying to throw basketballs. And I remember she suddenly stopped and looked at us all and went, "Can you not all control your children?" And I just looked at her, bemused, because I remember thinking, I'd love to see you in about 10 years' time. You've got your children. Yeah. And then she
Well,
can
they
come and
had,
tell me about it.
and that was
Because
back in the
sometimes you
day
have,
when it was 3 hours long, and those
yeah,
children had been good for 3 hours. I mean, they've got to let off steam. That's the way I saw it.
Yeah.
But
But
going back to that, when we were meeting in the school back in '95, we were meeting in a school up in Marylebone. I was war primary president, and I used to bribe my daughter, who was 5 at the time. If you're really good during sacrament, and I'd bring stuff for her, then we'll go to the park on the way home. And I did that, and a family came up. They saw me, and they came up to me and said, "You shouldn't be doing this." And I said, "Well, why not?" "Oh, because it's a Sabbath." And I said, "But we're not doing anything wrong. She's happy, I'm happy." And I
yeah,
explained why we were at the park so that I could get some spiritual input in sacrament. And he apologized the following week. He said, "I've given some great thought to what you said, a lot of thought to what you said," because his kids wanted to go into the park and he wouldn't let them. And he said, "You were right." He said, I couldn't see it from my position. He couldn't see it from my position because
mhm,
he had husband, wife, what we
yeah,
lose family. But that's how I got through. Because if she's fractious during sacrament, what do I get? I come home frustrated, annoyed, and irritated. And I honestly don't see anything wrong with being in a park on a Sunday afternoon.
no, neither do I. And Marie, you look like you could relate to that. You were smiling and nodding
Sorry.
along, like yes.
no, I was just listening to her. She's right about perception. Um, Sorry, the thought, honestly, it's terrible for me because sometimes the thought comes and then it flies out and I can't remember the point I wanted to make, so I apologize. But no, it's true. There's just so much to learn. I think it's just about respecting differences. You know,
Yep.
if you can do that, then you're halfway there. You know, and we're not going to know everything because life. The one as I was listening to this, I was thinking, and I'm sure each of you can tell me this. Whenever you have a child, even as a baby in your arms, you see a personality, and they are different from the other child that you've had, or they're all different. And there are children that are just challenging, and they're going to be challenging, and there's no reason other than that is their personality.
Mhm.
So it's, you know, luck of the draw, mate.
I got a, sorry,
No, go ahead, Carol.
there was something I read I was just trying to look for it, sorry. And it was President Nelson saying, you can disagree with people, but you can still get along. You can have differences of opinions and everything. Doesn't matter. There isn't any reason to start a fight or get bad tempered. Just respect each other's views, you know,
Mhm.
and each of us have to. Joseph Smith said it, I teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves. For some, watching a Disney movie on a Sunday is a good Sabbath activity. If it means people can be together, some don't watch telly at all, but it's down to the individual.
Yeah.
And I think you have to tailor it for your specific needs. Nobody's the same, but
That's
you have
right.
to be tolerant or respectful of the way they do that. You can't say, no, that's right, no, that's wrong. There are some things you can, you know, where you should try and avoid spending and stuff on the side. But you know what I'm saying?
I do. And I
People,
think there's two things I'd love to pick up on what both of you said. You said, you know, you learn through life experience. And I know I personally didn't think of, I had two single parent friends before I became one, but I didn't actually think of their individual experiences. And when I would organize like dinner parties, even though they were great friends of mine and I'd organize play dates for our kids, I would never think to invite them to the dinner party. And then I
Mm.
became a single parent and I realized like how completely just short-sighted that was of me. And actually there's I shared this with somebody in my ward, and her husband invite me and the boys around for Sunday dinner all the time. And I'm always so grateful because I know that the natural inclination is to think of the couple in the ward that you can invite over. But when I get that text from her being like, come around for dinner, it just is a huge difference. And um, so my short-sightedness with single parenthood previously, it makes me go, where else do I have blind spots in my life? And maybe that's a question we need to continue to ask ourselves. Where are my blind spots? How can I uncover them? And then Carol, you say, you know, we need to respect. There has to be this level of respect. And I think if we again go back to what is the doctrine in Christ versus maybe what's culturally evolved over time, I think he would have seen you playing in that park and just loved the joy that you were creating with your daughter that Sunday.
yeah.
Perfect. And so um, I don't know if we have any questions that have come in yet, but I think this is probably a good time because I know other people will be watching this on catch up. There, if there are kind of questions that do come to mind when you watch this, please get in touch with Kenya because
I
those
was
can
just
be
going to add
passed
one
on
more.
to Emma and Carol.
Sorry, Rita, I was just going to add one more thing. Being a single parent, as I said, I put on lots of activities up until lockdown for almost 2 years. And I always said, children welcome. Because
Yes.
if you know, you just wouldn't be able to do anything. So we always had a space. I remember once we had a reggae party. You know, I mean, it was, you know, quite sedate, but still a reggae party. But we had a baby in there.
Yeah.
And, you know, not for very long, but the baby was there, and everybody was just oohing and ahhing. And but it's just to have a space where children can be, because I mean, I went on after my children were practically grown to take on two of my grandchildren from the ages of 3 and 5. So I did it all over again.
Yep. And
No,
you talked about
you must be crazy.
you have uncovered a blind spot when it comes to activities, because if you have to actually get a babysitter, and the going rates in London are
Yeah,
expensive, like $10 an
yeah.
hour is cheap, that
Hmm.
becomes a barrier to single parents who then can't come
Yeah.
because they've been priced out. So that's a
Yes.
blind spot, Anne-Marie, that you've uncovered and said, right, let's get away with this. Let's remove this barrier. And we've had a comment come in, and please excuse me, because I'm going to have to swipe up on my phone to read it because it's quite long, but it's super powerful, and I want to make sure we do. So my camera might go off, but I am still here.
Okay.
And the comment that's come in is, I'm a single parent and I was never ashamed of being one. It's really important that we feel good about ourselves and how we show our children that it's okay if a relationship breaks down. Don't be afraid and think that you are less worthy of anything. We are Heavenly Father's daughters. We have the opportunity to show the next generation that when we do everything that is asked of us and something fails, it's okay. We need to move forward and think about our purpose in this life. I'm very proud of the sisters who are on this panel. I just wanted to say that they are strong and should always be grateful of being who they are. That's such a lovely comment. And so right. And we could probably have a whole nother conversation, you know, about when we have this perceived deal of shame that might keep us in situations that are unsafe or relationships that don't serve us well. So by letting small things, Carol, like showing primary children that families come in all shapes and sizes, when they're older, they can make great decisions because they know that they're not a failure if it looks different than the 2x2.
Yes.
And I just wonder, actually, because we've touched on it quite briefly in terms of the blind spots, and I wondered if there are any other blind spots that you as single parents can share in terms of that would be great for other people in the ward to be aware of or know. One of them, Anne-Marie, said, you know, let's make sure children are welcome at activities, or perhaps we get people in to babysit for free so that barrier, that financial barrier is removed. Is there anything else?
The only thing I was thinking about, this is before you get to even marriage. I mean, when I got married quite young. I got married at 19, and it's only years later you think, why did I never sit down and have a conversation with this man before I got married? Do you know what I mean? Why didn't I discuss things? Please, you know who you're marrying if you can. But my bishop once said to me, look, you can pray, you can have that confirmation, you can marry, and 10, 15 years later, things can change. So nothing is guaranteed. And I think it's, crikey, how would you put this? I mean, to me, it's very important to sit down. And there was something else I once read by John Bytheway, and people's backgrounds have a big bearing on what happens when you come together. And he said, you know, create your own way of doing things, you know, because what happens is you all come in, oh, I do it this way, and the other person, oh, I do it this way. Try and create something that you can both do together, you know, as to how you're going to organize your life within your marriage.
Yeah. And we've just had another question come in that says, each of you have mentioned feeling a sense of failure. How can sisters overcome this feeling of failure, especially when single parents are trying their best with their given circumstances? Carol, do you want to tackle that first?
Well, sense of failure. I stopped myself going to the temple because of that sense of failure. I didn't think I was worthy. And it wasn't till we had a missionary couple over and we were just chatting over dinner, and I said, oh, I haven't been to the temple for years. And so he just chatted and asked me these questions. And I was going, yeah, I do that. We were just chatting away. He said, you've just passed your temple recommend interview. So I was fully worthy to go to the temple, but because I'd failed in my marriage, and I think for me anyway, that's how I overcame it. I thought, oh yeah, I'm doing everything. I'm doing the best I can in everything I can. I'm trying hard to do the right thing. And I think that inner peace that comes from knowing that you shouldn't be ashamed, you have to get that from the Lord, and you have to build up a really good, strong relationship with him. For me anyway, that's helped me to, you know, and I've had a few negative comments made to me about it, but it's just water off a duck's back. I couldn't care less now what people think. You know, I'm just do everything you can to, you know, do the best you can, and know that your best is good enough for Heavenly Father. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's what the Lord thinks. And if it's okay with the Lord, then you're on the right path. You're heading in the right direction.
You know, I had the experience. I mean, the feeling of failure didn't last that long, but I did have an experience where I remember I was sitting in my living room. I was on my own, and I knew things weren't great. And I remember just sort of saying out loud, "What do I really want?" And the one thing I knew is I definitely wanted the gospel in my life, and for that to be there all the time. And I saw myself going forward on this road in the gospel. And yet when I tried to see my partner, it was like something shut down. Something just shut down. I couldn't see him there. And eventually, a few weeks after that, everything came to a head, and we split up. But it's about you again. It's about how you decide to look forward, because failure happens in life. It doesn't have to be a marriage. It can be anything, but it doesn't have to be a permanent and a thing, and it doesn't have to determine your future. So it's just understanding that it's you know, there are many, I mean, I've seen them all over YouTube where they say failure is an opportunity to learn, and people fail many times before they're successful. But I mean, we're talking about relationships here. And I think you've got to be really honest with yourself, and that helps.
Definitely. And personally, I don't think there was a light bulb moment where all of a sudden I didn't feel like a failure. I think it was slowly over time because, you know, I talked about just the intense pain I was in. But then it was going out to dinner for the first time with my boys and not actually thinking, you know, getting through the meal and going, oh, I didn't worry once that other people were wondering where their dad was. It's taking them on our first holiday when it was just me, and taking these moments that during my deepest, darkest time, I could never have imagined. And just taking a moment to be grateful for them and that joy that I was experienced that was just on the other side of my pain. And literally the only thing you talk about, there's a story, you know, Jesus on the boat during the storm and his disciples wake him up and like, come on, the waves are crashing and the wind is blowing. And he just gently reminds them like, dude, you saw me multiply loaves and fishes. Don't you know who I am? Like, I won't leave you. If you call for me, I will be there. And that for me has kind of been my journey for 3 years, is recognizing and leaning very hard on that if I call, he will be there, you know, in the times of joy and also in the times of the absolute eye of the storm. And we've just had a comment in, so I'm going to beam out, but you'll hear me. It strikes me that others' judgment is born out of fear. Those who are in the position of being single are strong because they've suffered such a difficult experience and come through it. Those that have not and judge are likely afraid for themselves that they couldn't cope with such a situation. They could, but they don't realize they could. And I think that's a great comment. I think that's very powerful. I know I can relate to that. I know since I've been in such a horrible position that, you know, I know that something else could rock my life, a family illness or death. But I also know that in my time, you know, now my time of absolute darkness, that there was light on the other side. And there's a question, so I want to make sure I put this question to both of you. It says, you touched on the impact of being a single parent had on your children. Can you tell us more about that impact? Carol, do you want to share first, and then Anne Marie will come to you?
Yeah.
Yep, I think for Alana, it was hard because all her friends in primary, most of them Hyde Park used to be one ward, and for Hyde Park was made up of a lot of Americans, and I love Americans, don't get me wrong. And so there's mum, dad, and the kids, which is how it should be. And that's what she saw. And I think she felt kind of, they didn't make her feel that way, but I think she in herself felt, you know, not quite the same and a bit not left out. She was never left out. She was always invited to things and everything, but I just think she thought herself as a little bit different because there wasn't a dad on the scene. And
Yeah.
that was just her feeling. It wasn't through anybody's actions or anything, because we were always over primary families' homes, doing stuff, going on outings with them. We were involved in a lot of that, invited to lots. But I mean, you'd have to ask her, I think. But it did impact on her. I know it did.
And Marie, what about you?
I spoke to my son. I'm going to say it depends on the age of the children, because by the time I got completely broken up, my son was about 11, 12. His sister was 2 years older than that. So the first two, my son said to me the other night, cracked me up. He said to me, "No, there was no way, Mum. He was just glad it ended."
Yeah.
Like, yep. Oh, all right. We just enjoyed the more tranquil life at home. Whereas my youngest son, he played up at school. You know what I mean? Until he got used to it. So it does affect them. It depends on what they've experienced. There's no one way to say, oh, it's going to affect a child this way or that way, because it all depends on what they were experiencing and how the child felt after the parent had gone. Because my son said, look, I realized my dad had issues, and they were really sort of out there in the marriage, and the things that they saw. So he said I was 100% for it.
It's interesting that you say that, because it was different. My kids were 7 and my twins were 3, 7 and 3. And for my 3-year-olds, it didn't really impact them because I couldn't remember. But for my eldest, there was definitely an before and an after for him. And so he went to therapy, and one of the things he struggled with was vocalizing how he felt inside. And so what we learned is we'd have him draw an outline of a body and color what it felt like. And sometimes that would be red in the throat because it was tight because he was sad. Sometimes that'd be pink in his belly because it'd be butterflies. But the other thing that I have done is there's an app called Frollo for single parents. And you can find single parents in your community. So I set up play dates with a bunch of other single parent families so that they saw that they're normal. 1 in 4 families in the UK are single parent household. That's 25% of your friends, your colleagues, your congregation. That's a huge and amazing number that should be represented and recognized. And we just have a few more comments, and I want to make sure I read those out. It says, I'm a single parent and have raised 2 daughters. One is a mother and did not quite understand the dynamics of the man's role and that they are scared of being broke. I've learned a lot from relationships. I think that's super true. And I think actually by you guys sharing your story and also realizing that there doesn't have to be such gender roles, that perhaps we can empower that next generation of women to feel like they can carve their own path. And I know I mentioned Frollo app. Carol and Anne-Marie, are there any resources that you recommend?
Friends.
Yeah.
I don't have. I mean, we're going back when I did the internet wasn't around when my daughter was young, so I had no internet resources. It literally was ward members, family, and friends that helped me through, and Heavenly Father and the Savior. That's the best resource.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put it.
Well, I think that's actually a beautiful way to wrap this up in terms of what a powerful resource that is. And I want to thank you, Anne-Marie, and I want to thank you, Carol, for sharing your stories, because there is power in that. And also it's just a really brave thing for you to do. So thank you for doing that. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Kenya.
Thanks, Rita, and thank you so much, Carol and Anne-Marie. Really appreciate how generous you have been with sharing your experiences, and I have loved hearing how you've each touched on that faith and power of prayer to be able to call upon God's help, and just those sacred experiences that you've given some light to us to learn from. and how God has been such an integral part of that journey for you. And it's really inspiring to hear. So thank you so much. Something as well, I love how you've touched on the priesthood and how you recognize that in your home as well. And that is something that we as Stake Relief Society have an emphasis on learning about this year. And so although it's sad that this is the last women's conference that we have, we will have a panel discussion in November and continue to learn about the priesthood and how we can access that for us as individuals and in our families. And something that I've learned, I know we've touched on keys in my study so far. I feel like keys is something that we use within the structure of the church, but I love how you've touched on that priesthood power and how that's been so evident in your motherhood with your children and in your individual lives as well. And I've just loved hearing how you've been able to tap into that and access that. And so looking forward to continue learning about that together. And I love how you've provided a really beautiful segue for us to be able to continue that discussion later in the end of the year too. I just also want to say a massive thank you to Zinta, our event secretary, who has tirelessly worked on these women's conferences the last, I think it's probably 18 months or so, and really grateful for all of the work and energy that she's put into these conferences, that we can learn from incredible women like the three that we've listened to this evening. So thank you so much again, really appreciate it.